running on top of a node that is actually based on a virtual kubelet. Okay? So other things that we have here, so you can definitely run containers on Azure virtual machines as well. We do have customers doing that. We also have the concept of a scale set, which is essentially in a simple command, you can deploy like 1,000 hosts on Azure. And you can have like a huge, let's say, container cluster there as well, right? So Microsoft came up some time back with Service Fabric, which is a nice offering for managing microservices architecture. And besides other things, we also support Docker there as well. And we also support containers on batch, okay? Okay, so we also have a concept of a more PaaS offering based on app service. We call it actually app service. So this is a PaaS offering where you don't care about the underlying infrastructure, you just drop your code, and the underlying infra, it can be like a Windows server, a Linux server, and more recently, we are also supporting Docker containers there, right? And finally here on this framework, we have our, what we call Azure Container Registry, which is a private registry that we have on Azure, right, with Docker APIs. So essentially, if you don't want to have, let's say, your images on Docker Hub, you can have this registry of ours that uses native Docker APIs. Very cool features. For example, you can have a REPL here in the US West region replicate into US East, for example, right? And what are the benefits of that? Essentially, where you're going to have your applications running is not going to take too long in order to fetch the container images as well. And other things like supporting third-party solutions like Twistlock and Aqua in order to scan all the containers, so we have all those APIs available as well. Okay, so I will double click a little bit in a couple of them. So we are going today to use AKS, right? After I share the lab information with you guys, it will actually deploy an AKS cluster on Azure. Okay?
AKS is a Kubernetes?
Yeah, it's Azure Kubernetes Services. Yeah, it's the managed Kubernetes.
Yes, I'm not very familiar with AKS, that's why I'm asking this.
No worries.
When you have this service, are you saying that someone doesn't have to build a Kubernetes cluster on their own? Is it a managed
That's
service
right.
you're providing?
Yes, exactly, yeah, exactly. Let me share this with you, right? So before we came up with Azure Kubernetes Services, right? This is how a Kubernetes cluster would like, looks like on Azure, right? Or looked like if we use the let's say legacy Azure Container Services deployment, right? You would have a bunch of VMs. We would streamline the deployment on your behalf, right? And then you would have access to the control plane, which is composed by the master nodes, which was explained by Jim before. And you would have also the worker nodes, which we call agent VMs, right? So essentially, this is how we used to do on Azure. So let's say you didn't want to have Azure Container Services, or neither like, let's say, AKS. You will need to deploy all this by yourself. I mean, this is a high-level abstraction. Behind this, you have a lot of complexity, right? Especially when it comes from networking configuration to storage configuration and all that stuff, right? So all the cloud providers, they're coming up with the managed Kubernetes offering in order to make it simple, right? For you to run containerized workloads in the cloud. Make sense? Yeah. Okay, so this is how it used to look like. Now with the managed Kubernetes offering, Azure Kubernetes Services, this is how it looks like. So we host the control plane for you. So all the managed nodes, they run actually within a Microsoft subscription, right? You don't pay for the nodes related to the master nodes, okay? But you would pay for the worker nodes. And by the way, Kubernetes on Azure is a free service. The only thing that you pay are essentially the resources that you use in terms of VMs, storage, and networking. That's it, right? So, yeah, so the benefit here is, first of all, we manage the control plane. And with this new offering as well, it's much easier for you to scale. Let's say you create a number of worker nodes and you want to scale or even upgrade or apply security patches as well, we made everything easy from that perspective. So I don't have a specific slide to talk about it, but I will just mention. So, because I believe it was mentioned before. More recently, Azure, during build, we announced the Azure CNI, which gives you advanced networking capabilities for Azure Kubernetes services. So essentially, it connects the Kubernetes cluster with a lot of our services. In terms of a load balancer, we will have our layer 7 load balancer as well that we call application gateway. And the other benefit with that is you can actually deploy on an existing virtual network. If you guys are familiar with the AWS term for VPC, for example, on Azure, we call it virtual network. Okay, it's your own address space, right, a CIDR block and so on, okay? So just to finalize the thought here on the Azure container instances, right? So, and I try to actually make sure you guys don't confuse them, even though we're not going to use ACI today. So the benefits of having a serverless container running on a cloud platform is essentially you can have a container in seconds, a matter of seconds, right? No VM management, custom CPU and memory as well. You can actually deploy an Azure container instance with a number of CPU and memory as well. You can specify the size of your container. And it's built, it's micro billing, it's built per second. It's using the Azure hypervisor level isolation. And we support, which is pretty cool actually, we support Linux and Windows containers for this offering. Okay, so the final thing I want to mention before we go to the lab part. Have you guys heard about Open Service Broker? Okay, so imagine, for example, you deploy a cluster, let's say Kubernetes on any given cloud, right? So you have all your containers, but now you want to use one of the managed services in the cloud provider. It can be, let's say, AWS RDS or Azure SQL or MySQL, for example, right? So how you can streamline actually this configuration in terms of deploying your pods and make sure those containers connect to this database, for example, right, with the Helm chart. So OSBA is actually an open source project, and we have, besides Microsoft, I believe IBM is part, I think Google as well, and many others like Pivotal, for example. And I believe the whole idea started with Pivotal. So essentially, we allow connectivity between all those different services here with our managed offerings on Azure. Right, so you can very easily connect your containers with an Azure SQL database, Redis Cache, and Cosmos DB as well. Okay, so there are many other things we could talk here. I just wanted to give you guys a feedback. So you guys have the Meetup webpage. It's in one of the slides there. But essentially, you can guys get in touch with us, and we can share more material with you. Okay, and I will put a summary slide alongside with Jim's presentation. And I'm also getting some of the presentations, some of the slides from the Tigera team as well, okay? Okay, so let's go to the hackathon material. So if you guys go to this link here, it's GitHub repo. And there we have all the instructions on how we are going to set up the environment, okay? So I believe someone asked on the Meetup page whether we need to install something on the computer or whether we support Mac or Windows. The answer is we are going to do everything through the browser. So Azure has what we call Cloud Shell. You can easily get a bash command or a PowerShell as well. And you have a lot of software installed already, including like a kubectl, for example, right? Terraform and among other things like Azure CLI and all that stuff, okay? So the lab is based on this premises, right? That you are going to go to Azure portal and run everything from the cloud. Make sense? Okay, so and I will open it here as well, and we can do some of these steps together. So after we get the cloud set up, we are going to have Nirmata sharing a couple of slides as well. and talking about the Nirmata part, which is pretty cool as well. So essentially, the lab is setting up a cluster, Kubernetes cluster, and then we have a Nirmata configured in order to talk to this cluster and deploy a microservices type application on top of this cluster. Okay? Okay, so we also have some proctors in the room. We have Mohan, Rakesh, Babak, and yeah, you guys, yeah. And Neil is outside as well. So we have, and we are all from the same team here at Microsoft Architects. And we are happy to go around and make sure you guys are setting up it correctly. If you need some help, just let us know, okay? Yeah, I will share.